At my sister's wedding, I found my seat, a wobbly folding chair near the speakers. When I asked, her fiancé's mom smirked. She said, "You're not part of their side of the family." I looked around and found even my sister's high school lab partner had a front row seat. So I walked up during the toasts, took back the envelope with my $8,500 check, and said into the mic, "Congrats to the happy couple. I won't stay any longer than my welcome." My sister's face went pale. Her groom just stared. I dropped the mic and walked out while everyone watched. I, 32M, stared at the wobbly folding chair they'd assigned me, positioned so close to the speakers that my ears were already ringing from the sound check. The wedding was supposed to start in 20 minutes, and I was watching guests file past me toward the pristine white chairs arranged in neat rows closer to the altar. My sister's wedding day, and apparently I belonged in the overflow section. The venue looked stunning. She'd chosen this lakeside pavilion with string lights draped between oak trees, and the sunset was painting everything golden. I'd helped her scout this place 2 years ago when she first got engaged. We'd walked these same paths, and she'd grabbed my arm excitedly when we found this spot, telling me how perfect it would be. Now I was sitting behind a family I didn't recognize while her old lab partner from high school waved at me from the third row. I caught the attention of a woman in an elaborate purple dress who seemed to be directing people to their seats. She had the same sharp features as the groom and wore the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. When I approached her, she looked me up and down with obvious disapproval. I explained that there might be some confusion about my seating assignment, mentioning that I was the bride's brother. Her smirk widened as she informed me that my sister had been very specific about the seating arrangements. According to her, my sister had made it clear that I wasn't really part of their side of the family anymore. The words hit like a slap, but I kept my expression neutral as she gestured back toward my assigned chair. Walking back to my spot, I tried to process what I'd just heard. My sister and I had our differences, sure, but this felt deliberately cruel. I thought about the envelope in my jacket pocket containing the check I'd written 3 weeks ago after my promotion came through. $8,500. It represented months of overtime and weekend shifts at the engineering firm, money I'd saved specifically for this moment because I wanted to give her something meaningful for her new life. The ceremony began, and I watched from my distant perch as my sister walked down the aisle in the dress we'd picked out together during one of our better days last spring. She looked radiant, but when her eyes swept over the crowd, they passed right over me like I was invisible. Her groom stood waiting, the same guy who used to seek my advice about surprising her with romantic gestures back when we all got along. During the exchange of vows, I found myself thinking about how we'd gotten to this point. The falling out had started small, like these things usually do. A disagreement about our parents' estate after Dad passed 2 years ago. She'd wanted to sell the house immediately, while I thought we should wait for the market to improve. Then there were arguments about Mom's care as her health declined. Every conversation became a battle, and somewhere along the way, we'd stopped being siblings and started being adversaries. But even through all of that, I'd assumed family was family. I'd figured that by showing up today with a generous gift and an open heart, we could begin to rebuild what we'd lost. Looking around at the faces of people who apparently mattered more to her than I did, I realized how naive that assumption had been. The ceremony concluded, and everyone moved to the reception area where tables were arranged under a large white tent. I found my assigned table in the back corner, sharing space with what appeared to be distant relatives and plus ones who didn't know anyone. The couple at my table introduced themselves as friends of friends, the kind of people who get invited because their parents knew the bride's parents decades ago. Dinner service began, and I watched the wedding party's table laugh and toast while I picked at my chicken. The speeches started, and one by one, people stood to share memories and well wishes. Her college roommate talked about late-night study sessions and inside jokes. His best man recounted bachelor party adventures and childhood memories. Even her former boss said a few words about her dedication and bright future. I kept waiting for someone to mention me, some reference to her family or her brother who'd driven 8 hours to be here today. Nothing. It was as if I'd never existed in her life at all. That's when I made my decision. I stood up, pulling the envelope from my pocket, and walked toward the front of the tent. The current speaker, one of the groom's cousins, was wrapping up his toast about true love conquering all obstacles. People noticed me moving through the crowd, and conversations began to quiet as I approached the microphone area. The cousin finished his speech and handed over the microphone to the wedding coordinator, but I stepped forward and gently took it from her hands. The tent fell silent except for the soft jazz music still playing from the speakers. My sister's face appeared in my peripheral vision, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm as she realized what was happening. I looked out at the crowd of faces, some familiar but mostly strange, and felt a calm settle over me that surprised me. I'd spent the entire day feeling hurt and excluded, but standing here now, I felt something different. Clarity. I spoke into the microphone, telling everyone congratulations to the happy couple and explaining that I wouldn't be staying any longer than my welcome. My voice carried clearly through the tent, and I could feel the weight of everyone's attention. I pulled out the envelope containing my check and held it up so my sister could see it clearly. The look on her face told me she knew exactly what was inside. We'd talked about wedding gifts months ago, back when we were still speaking regularly, and I'd mentioned wanting to do something significant for her big day. She'd seemed touched then, even emotional about the gesture. I walked over to her table and placed the envelope directly in front of her, right next to her champagne glass. Her face had gone completely pale, and her new husband sat frozen beside her, his mouth slightly open as he processed what was happening. The silence in the tent was complete now. Even the background music had stopped. I returned to the microphone and set it down on its stand rather than handing it back to anyone. The soft thud it made as it hit the base echoed through the tent sound system. Then I turned and walked toward the exit, my footsteps the only sound in the space. Behind me, I could hear the beginning of whispered conversations starting up again, the kind of urgent murmuring that happens when something unexpected disrupts a carefully planned event. I didn't turn around to see the reactions or gauge the damage. I'd said what I needed to say and done what I needed to do. The drive home gave me 8 hours to think about what had just happened. Part of me felt guilty for disrupting her wedding day, but a larger part felt relieved. I'd been carrying around hurt feelings and false hope for months, thinking that somehow we'd magically reconcile and everything would go back to how it used to be between us. Update 1. 3 days after the wedding, my phone started buzzing with messages I'd been expecting but dreading. The first came from my aunt, asking what had happened at the reception because she'd heard conflicting stories from different family members. Then my mother called, her voice strained as she tried to understand why I'd left my sister's wedding so abruptly. The version of events that had made its way through the family grapevine bore little resemblance to what had actually occurred. According to the story my sister had apparently shared, I'd shown up late, demanded special treatment, and then caused a scene when I didn't get my way. There was no mention of the seating arrangements, the dismissive comments from the groom's mother, or the months of being treated like I didn't exist. I found myself in the strange position of having to defend actions I didn't regret to people who hadn't witnessed what had led up to them. When I explained about the folding chair near the speakers and the comment about not being part of the family, some relatives seemed genuinely shocked. Others clearly didn't believe me, choosing instead to accept my sister's version because it painted me as the unreasonable one. My cousin reached out privately, admitting she'd noticed the seating arrangement and thought it was odd but hadn't wanted to cause drama by bringing it up. She'd seen me talking to the groom's mother and had wondered what was being said. Her validation meant more than I'd expected it to. The hardest conversation came when my sister finally called me directly for days after her wedding. Her voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before, even during our worst arguments about Dad's estate. She told me I'd humiliated her in front of everyone who mattered to her, that I'd ruined what should have been the happiest day of her life over a seating arrangement. When I tried to explain that it wasn't about the chair itself, but about what it represented, she cut me off. She said I'd always been selfish and dramatic, that I couldn't handle not being the center of attention for one day. The conversation spiraled quickly into territory we'd covered before, rehashing old grievances and opening wounds that had barely started to heal. But something was different this time. Instead of getting drawn into the familiar pattern of accusations and defensive responses, I found myself staying calm. I told her I was sorry she felt humiliated, but I wasn't sorry for leaving when I realized I wasn't wanted there. I explained about the check and what it had represented to me, the gesture I'd hoped might bridge the gap between us. She was quiet for a long moment after that, and I thought maybe we were finally getting somewhere. Then she told me the money didn't matter, that she'd never asked me for anything and didn't need my charity. She said if I wanted to be part of her life, I needed to learn to respect her decisions and stop trying to control everything. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was accusing me of being controlling while simultaneously dictating the terms of our relationship and dismissing my feelings as invalid. I realized we were having two completely different conversations about two completely different relationships. Update 2. 2 weeks later, I received a text from my brother-in-law, my sister's new husband. He asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us, to talk about what had happened. I was surprised by the outreach, considering he'd barely spoken to me at family gatherings over the past year. We met at a neutral location downtown, a busy coffee shop where the ambient noise would give us privacy without the intimacy of someone's home. He looked uncomfortable as we sat down, fidgeting with his cup and avoiding eye contact for the first few minutes. Eventually, he told me he'd been thinking about the wedding day and some things weren't sitting right with him. He'd known about the seating arrangements beforehand, he admitted, but hadn't realized how it would look or feel from my perspective. His mother had suggested putting me in the back because she'd heard we'd been having family problems, and he'd agreed without really thinking it through. He seemed genuinely remorseful as he explained that he'd never intended to slight me or make me feel unwelcome. He'd gotten caught up in trying to manage family dynamics and keep everyone happy, which had resulted in the opposite of what he'd intended. His apology felt authentic in a way that my sister's anger hadn't. But then he surprised me by sharing something else. He told me that my sister had been struggling with our relationship for longer than I'd realized. She'd confided in him about feeling like I judged her choices and questioned her decisions, particularly around our parents' estate and mom's care. She'd interpreted my concerns as attempts to control her, and over time, that perception had colored every interaction between us. He said she'd been genuinely hurt that I'd contested Dad's will and pushed for a different approach to selling the house. From her perspective, I was putting financial considerations ahead of her emotional need to move on from that chapter of our lives. She'd seen my practical concerns as criticism of her grieving process. Learning about her perspective didn't excuse how she'd treated me at the wedding, but it gave me context I'd been missing. We'd been having the same conflicts, but experiencing them completely differently. I'd thought I was being helpful and protective. She'd felt controlled and dismissed. He asked if I'd be willing to consider family counseling, something he'd apparently suggested to my sister as well. He thought maybe with a neutral third party, we could work through some of these misunderstandings and find a way forward. I told him I'd think about it, though I was skeptical that counseling could bridge a gap that had grown this wide. Update 3. A month after the wedding, I made a decision that surprised even me. I wrote my sister a letter, not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter that I mailed to her new address. In it, I tried to explain my side of things without attacking her choices or defending my actions at the wedding. I wrote about how I'd felt watching her build a new life while gradually pushing me out of it. I explained that the seating arrangement had felt like a public confirmation of something I'd been sensing for months but hadn't wanted to acknowledge. I told her about the check and what I'd hoped it might accomplish, and I admitted that maybe my timing and methods had been wrong even if my intentions were good. But I also wrote about boundaries and respect, concepts that seemed to have gotten lost in our family dynamics. I explained that while I regretted disrupting her wedding day, I didn't regret standing up for myself when I felt dismissed and unwanted. I told her I loved her and wanted her to be happy, but I couldn't continue pretending that our relationship was healthy when it clearly wasn't. I ended the letter by saying I was open to working on things if she was genuinely interested in rebuilding our relationship on more equal terms. But I also made it clear that I wouldn't accept being treated as less important than her high school lab partner or distant family friends. If she wanted me in her life, it had to be as her brother, not as someone she tolerated when convenient. I never received a response to that letter, and I haven't heard from her since. Our mother occasionally mentions her in passing, updating me on how the newlyweds are settling into their new home or sharing news about her job. But there's an awkward politeness to these updates that tells me she's walking on eggshells, trying not to take sides in a conflict she doesn't fully understand. The strange thing is, I'm okay with the silence. For the first time in months, I'm not carrying around the weight of a relationship that was making both of us miserable. I'm not second-guessing every family interaction or trying to read hidden meanings into casual conversations. I've started focusing more on the relationships that do work in my life, investing time and energy in friendships and family connections that feel balanced and genuine. The $8,500 I'd planned to give my sister ended up going toward a down payment on a new car, something practical and useful that brings me satisfaction every day. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks about that day, about the choice she made to seat me in the back and the way it all unfolded. I wonder if she regrets the way things ended, or if she's relieved not to have me challenging her decisions anymore. But mostly, I've stopped wondering. Some relationships can't be fixed with good intentions and generous gestures. Sometimes walking away, even dramatically, is the healthiest choice for everyone involved. That folding chair near the speakers taught me something valuable about knowing my worth and refusing to accept less than I deserve, even from family.